BBC Radio Stoke, Roy Orbison, Drove All Night. After 11 this morning, my guest is here, or actually already, Chris Cragg. Yesterday we were talking to an artist and forger who wrote a hit song. Today, musician, producer, runs his own studio and crew, and has played on stage with many, many stars, including The Gossip, Gareth Gates and others. And you were responsible for coaching and producing a man who went on to win the X Factor. So that's quite a good start for this morning.
Yeah, that's correct. Morning, yes, yeah. Shayne Ward.
So we've got lots to talk about this week. You've never forged any art, though, as far as I know.
No, not at all, no.
Guitarist, and some great musical heroes to talk about as well, being a guitarist. We thought we just caught you too late. We were going to get to bring the guitar in this morning.
Yes, I was already on the way down, unfortunately, so the guitar's still stuck into the studio, and maybe another time.
Yeah. So in terms of musical heroes, we'll probably start the next hour with one of your musical heroes. When you were growing up, you were a guitarist. Who do you admire, would you say?
I loved the likes of AC/DC, Angus Young with the rocket stuff, but I'm also a big Journey fan. Loved the Journey stuff, the big stadium rock, thought it was great. Big harmonies, great voices, great guitar players.
OK, well, we'll probably try and find a bit of Journey then. I think that would be a nice way to start, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that'd be great.
So yes, Chris is here, Chris Cragg here after 11. We'll be talking about what it takes to become a successful musician, what it takes to coach an X Factor winner, or somebody will go on to do it, and of course now runs his own studio. And then later this morning, how much does you... Actually had to refrain this morning from playing air guitar in the studio while that was on, because I've got a proper guitarist sitting in front of me. That would have been really embarrassing, wouldn't it, Chris, to be honest?
Well, go for it. It's up to you, really, if you want to.
The reason we're playing Journey and Don't Stop Believing, the kind of thing that inspired Chris Cragg to get into the whole picking up the guitar business, I presume.
Definitely, yeah. I was probably about 13. I think it was my sister who came. She got a job. She left school. She was working at Woolworths. And Woolworths was selling electric guitars at the time.
They sold everything.
Yeah, they did, yeah. And she basically came home with this guitar, which was £5, and changed my life. I went down to the local music shop, bought a book, Tune a Day. It was called, I think it was Bert Wheaton or somebody like that.
I was going to say, was it Bert Wheaton? He was legendary for that, wasn't
That's right, yeah. He probably lived off the royalties of that book rather than record sales, maybe, but basically inspired me to sit in the bedroom and play and practice, which was a bit bizarre, really, because I didn't come from a musical background.
So there was not really music in the house,
no.
just the stuff that your parents were listening to, perhaps?
Yeah, that's it, really, yeah. My father was into sort of the big band, the swing stuff. Mother wasn't really that musical, used to sing along to the records now and again that we're playing. So normally you tend to find a lot of musicians, it's the parents that inspire them to pick up or follow in their footsteps with guitar, piano.
Yeah, or perhaps older brothers' musical influences, that sort of thing, but not for you.
No, so it's a little bit strange, really, that I sort of got the bug, stuck with it, and ended up where I am today, really, which is... So
did the guitar come before discovering the guitarists?
Yes, I think it did, yeah. I was more into... I think what I basically liked to do was get the guitar and mime along to the songs. I think most people do, and imagine that you're on stage with these great bands. And it was just one of those things that just really got under my skin, and I loved it, and I just put the time and the commitment and the effort in. And
was there support or suspicion from parents? Because
support,
it's got a guitar, was great. The next thing it's going to be rock and roll.
Yeah, well, I do remember having this old valve amp in my bedroom, and my parents used to shout up the stairs, "Can you turn it down? Your tea's ready." And I just ignored them. And then I realised one day that they got quite good at getting me down for tea by just turning the electric off, which plunged everything off and everything went into darkness, and I realised, that's it, tea time, let's go down and eat. So,
see, I used to play the piano, they couldn't turn that off.
No, that's it, yeah.
That was a mistake you made there.
Yes, yeah.
So it was learning the chords and then perhaps discovering guitarists who did it better than you.
Yes, that's right, they inspired me. The likes of all the greats, really, your Santanas and your Hendrix, Hank Marvin's, all the great players, really.
Now, interesting you say Hank Marvin, because we all know he was a good guitarist, but probably not as cool as the other names you just mentioned, like Carlos Santana and Jimi Hendrix.
But very influential. Obviously one of the greatest, probably, guitar players to influence a generation. But did it great. Not technically brilliant, but what he did very, very well, and still sells a lot today, I suppose, don't he? The Shadows and
you were you completely self-taught, or did you decide to get some
one or two lessons, but then I sort of took it up more seriously, and then I started to study a lot of the music theory, which opened a lot of doors. A lot of guitar players get told that don't go down the route of the theory and understanding the music because it stifles the creativity. But I disagree. Personally, with me, I think it makes you a far better musician. You understand what needs to be played and why you play it, and it definitely made me far better, and it just sort of pushed me in the directions that I needed to go into, really.
Because so many famous musicians don't read music.
That's right, yes, yeah.
But you do?
Yes, yeah.
And that makes a difference?
Yes, yeah.
So where did you go with it from there? Presumably you've got this guitar and you suddenly realised you can play it. Was it then, I need to form a band?
Yes, I ended up doing a couple of local bands. I was in a band called Montreux and a band called Slider and one or two others over the years.
It's the names that get me. Yeah, great names for bands.
Yeah, it was all sort of the curly hair and the spandex, all that type of stuff.
Did you have amps that went up to 11?
Oh, still do, yeah.
That extra notch.
They're the industry standard, Stuart. You've got to have one of those, yeah. And basically did the club scene and the pub scene with the bands. Had some great times, great memories, and it just sort of evolved to the fact that I realised there was basically no money in the bands, and I wanted to be a full-time professional musician. So I basically gave the bands up and went solo and did the club scene, and then I ended up like a comedy vocal and doing, it's sort of, I've morphed probably more times than Madonna over the years.
You've changed.
Yes, yeah, and then ended up
changed your style and your image
in the club scene, doing a little bit of holiday parks and vocal entertainer and this type of stuff. And
is that a conscious decision that has to be made? Because there is a lot of money to be made as a good musician.
Yes,
definitely, yeah. But not necessarily if all you're doing is chasing fame.
That's right, yeah. I mean, it's one thing that I never did. I was never really into it for the fame and the fortune. And with the studio where I am now in Crewe, and I run a small independent record label there called Craggstar Records, I get a lot of people that come in and they say, I want to win the X Factor, I want to be famous, I want to be a millionaire. And it's all the wrong sort of answers, really, when I'm talking to them. It's basically the ones that I like are the ones that come in and go, I love singing, or I want to play and I just want to perform, and and if anything else comes on top, then that's a bonus, really.
So it's where you start, really. Do you think that's changed then, thanks to things? I mean, there were always talent shows, weren't there?
Yeah, the talent show, I think there's a place for them, but a couple of the local acts that we've got signed on the label, they basically don't want to do the X Factor or the voice thing. They want to try and do it just purely on reputation and hard work and chugging away around the pubs and clubs, and if anything does come, then that's a bonus for them as well, I suppose, And was that perhaps something you were hoping for with the bands, with those great names when you first started? This is it, we're going to be big. Yeah, I think looking back, I suppose I did really quite want the fame and the adulation, I suppose, but then you get to a certain age and you realise it's not everything that it's cracked up to be sometimes. And I quite like the idea of where, when I used to do a lot around the working men's clubs, you could go on stage and work great and do your 245s and maybe sign the odd autograph and then come off and go home and watch TV at night, and that was it, back to normal reality. So I think there's the pros and cons of all of it, really. Can you remember the first time you went on stage in front of an audience? Because there you are in your bedroom learning Bert Whedon's guitar, chord a day, tune a day, and can you remember the first time you took it on stage? I definitely can. It was a club in Northwich called the Gladstone Club, and I was probably about 15, 16, and I think we only knew about 4 or 5 songs, cover versions, and it went great, and we basically had to play the 4 or 5 songs all over again because... that was as good as we got, really. We didn't know what we were doing, and it was one of those moments where the nerves were terrible and you sort of realise that adrenaline really is brown, and you spend sort of 2 weeks panicking before you actually go on stage, and there was probably maybe 20, 25 people in there, but again, I got the bug. But that was like Wembley for you. Yeah, it was, yeah. There must have been at that time, though, if you go through it and you do it properly, as well as something that inspired you, there must be a gig that you think, this is the worst night of my life. Oh, I've had a few. I've had a few, yeah. Especially when I did the comedy sort of circuit. I supported a comedian called Billy Pearce. I remember a few years ago, and sort of got the bug to have a go at the comedy myself, and put the act together, and I thought it was all right, and I had 1 or 2 good shows, but I also had 1 or 2 bad shows where it's literally like the tumbleweed blowing across the stage when you open your first gag and nothing happens. That must be the worst gig in the world, being a comedian, because you're so... I mean, at least if you're a musician, even if you're not very good, you can play another song. And that's right, yeah. But if the gags don't... So the hard bit is you've got to then stand there, Stuart, for sort of 45 minutes, going through the act, knowing that nobody's interested, nobody's laughing, and where's soul the destroying. Guitar? Quick, save me. Yeah, but then, on the other foot, you can go out the following night to a different area in the country, do exactly the same show, and they're all doubled up in the aisles and laughing and rolling around, so there's a lot of light and shade with the comedy thing, and there's a lot of stress involved with that as well, I found. So I sort of stepped away from the comedy and went back to
the guitar.
Yeah, sort of doing the guitar stuff.
All right, we'll play a bit of music. Plenty to ask you about. Chris Cragg is with me this morning on BBC Radio Stoke. Maroon 5 now. Harry Spiller this morning, and back to my guest sitting there. Chris Cragg, we left your story where you'd picked up your guitar, you'd been on stage, you'd tried comedy, and decided it wasn't for you, so you'd stick with the music.
Yeah, go back to what you do well. Really,
so the decision, again, you say your parents were very supportive when you picked up a guitar, but when you decided that you actually wanted to make a living out of music, were they not a little bit worried for you?
Not at all. My parents have always been very good. You know, about 3 or 4 years ago, my wife and I decided to sell a house. And we decided to have an adventure, which was sell a house and buy a narrowboat, which we now live on in Nantwich. And again, the parents were quite behind that sort of thing as well. They said, you know, live for today, enjoy your life, and do what you want to do, really, which is probably a really good piece of advice that they gave to us. And we still try and do things a little bit wacky and crazy and just generally have a great time. So they really did push the guitar, not sort of push, but encourage, and basically left it up to me if I wanted to go down that route. It was there, and that's the route that I chose, really, Stuart. So.
And you played music a lot. Did you ever try writing? Yes,
I've written quite a bit over the years, and I still write now, and co-write with a lot of the acts that we've got on the label. We've got a young girl called Louise Green. She's just about to release her second single. There's another girl called Lydia O'Dowd. She's from Madeley. She's about to release a second single. And we've just signed a local guy from Crewe, about 22, called Andy Mack, who's got a great voice. He's a touch of Stevie Wonder, sort of meets Bruno Mars. So I'm sort of co-writing with all these three at the moment. And then, quite bizarrely, just before Christmas, I got an email from a girl in Brisbane, Australia, whose grandmother lives in Stoke. And so she came over to visit her gran at Christmas, came into the studio in Crewe and had a little chat. And then we're going to be probably working with Charlotte Emily, her name is. We're going to be working with Charlotte Emily in probably the next few weeks and see whether we can get something out for her. So the writing side of it, I'm sort of doing different styles, really, I suppose, along the way. You know, some of them are quite rocky, some of them are funk, some of them are acoustic pop. So it sort of keeps the finger in a lot of pies, really.
So you moved on from playing yourself to actually teaching others, and which is pretty much the role you're in now.
Yes, yeah.
Was that a conscious decision, or did you just evolve into that?
It just evolved into that, really, over the years. I teach vocals at a couple of schools. I teach at Winsford Act Academy, and I also do a little bit of music theory with one or two of them there. And so it was a natural thing, really, the performance. As I've got older, I've tried to get away more from the performance, and the love of music is just there. So it's naturally taken me down various roads over the years, and I think the studio and the label are the way that it seems to be now at the moment.
I suppose performance, you have to be prepared to lug your stuff around, because unless you make it to the very big time and have people to do that for you, you have to just be prepared to. It's quite a slog, isn't it?
Oh, it is.
You can make money, but there's a lot of
over the years I've probably done in excess of 3,500 professional shows, which is, when you think that there's 365 days in a year, it's a lot of years and a lot of travelling and a lot of mileage and late nights, and it's quite a stressful job, really, I suppose. It's quite a lonely job. You tend to be up and down the motorways on your own, and then you set up in a strange venue, do the gig, travel back in the
tiny dressing room with just a sink,
dressing cupboards.
But you spent some time as a session musician as well, didn't you?
I actually worked with a couple of guys that were signed to RCA. A guy from Dublin called Richie McGowan, who was a keyboard player and an arranger, and then there was a guy from Cardiff who was a session singer called Stevie Venus. Great name.
Oh, great name.
Yes.
Was that his real name?
No.
Didn't think
it was probably Stan Frith or something like that. It was just one of those.
Stevie Venus.
Yeah, it's a great name at the time.
That's almost like a character on a Peter Kay show. Isn't it? Imagine playing there, Stevie Venus.
Yeah, but we basically used to go down to a couple of studios in London, around Putney and places like that, do the odd session for them, and if RCA liked it, they took it away and they'd mix it and do whatever they wanted to do with it. It's mostly like commercials and jingles and that type of stuff. But I think the idea behind it was to sort of try and form this group with myself on guitar and Steve on vocals and Rich is the main songwriter. But a lot of people think it was like probably a glamorous thing to be doing, but you're basically driving down in a transit van, crashing on the floor of somebody's apartment down there, 3 or 4 days maybe in the studio, and then back in the van, back home, and off to the clubs trying to make a living at the weekends again. So
interesting thing, you could be on. I picked out some famous people who started or did session musician. Rick Wakeman,
yes, yeah,
played the piano on David Bowie's Life on Mars.
Yes, yeah.
Billy Joel, I think, did the piano on Leader of the Pack by the Shangri-La, and even Elton John was a session musician.
That's right, yeah.
They go on to be famous, but there's so many others that I once interviewed the guy who played the trumpet on Walking on Sunshine,
right,
the legend, the legendary trumpet bit, and I can't remember his name.
Right,
and that's the thing with a session musician, isn't it? You could be on some of these huge hits because all the best singers need musicians behind them.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think how we tend to work nowadays is it's all done in house. I've got the ability to actually do all the production myself, so that saves costs and expense really nowadays for anything that we release on the little label.
And has that made a difference to the way? I mean, you obviously have your own studio, but guys who come, I think Daniel Bedingfield is the one that comes to mind. He did his whole first album in his bedroom. He didn't have to leave his house.
That's right, yeah. The studio thing is a very tough game nowadays. It's very, very difficult to make money out of a recording studio because, for that reason, really, there's some great guys sitting in the bedroom using Pro Tools and Logic and one or two other sort of software programs that just basically drag and drop loops and samples in, and away they go, and they can create the stuff there.
Yeah.
But I still think there's a massive place for professional quality recordings, and I think that's the difference. Is you can record something at home possibly, but you need that professional mastering or mix on it that
add the show
that sheen. Yes, yeah, definitely.
We will come on to at the X Factor,
okay,
so Mr. Shayne Ward, but you did mention being quite a fan of this guy, so we'll play this. Carlos Santana, the band Santana, featuring Rob Thomas. He was the one doing the singing. My guest this morning at BBC Radio Stoke, Chris Cragg, a guitarist and now producer and teacher of music.
Yes.
We were just saying that very rare for a band to be based around the guitarist. People perhaps don't realise Carlos Santana didn't sing.
That's true, yeah.
Does the singer get all the glory?
They always tend to, I think, yes, which was probably why I sort of developed the voice a little bit when I was a bit younger as well, because I realised that was the guy standing at the back doing a lot of the work, but it was the guy at the front that got all the girls and the glory. So I thought, hang on a minute, I need to maybe sort of try and do a little bit of both here if I can. So I decided to take a couple of years where I just blasted the voice, did every exercise possible, and then 2.5 years down the road went out, did an audition for a few agents, and they loved it. And within about 6 weeks I was signed with about 9 agencies and off more as a singer rather than a guitar player for a certain amount of time. So the guitar took a little bit of a back step, and it was vocals that sort of came to the fore, really.
Which I suppose is all the biggest stars are a little bit versatile like that, aren't they?
I think
there's something under this sleeve.
I think to stay in the industry, which is a very, very tough industry nowadays, being just a performer, it's very, very hard to make a living now. The venues aren't there anymore, and it's just getting tougher and tougher. There's so many acts that are all trying to get in the same venues. So basically, acts are undercutting one another, and the standard of musicianship doesn't seem to be the same to me anymore.
The one that springs to mind is Gary Barlow. A very similar story to yourself. He lugged his keyboard around those working men's clubs for many years before he even to take that thing started.
Yes, he used to be the resident keyboard player in Halton British Legion near Runcorn. Gary did, which I've done many a time, but unfortunately not when Gary was there. So.
you and Gary have played the same venue, but not at the same time.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that, because you now teach people, you coach people, and obviously with the studio you produce people. When somebody walks in through the door, how do you manage those expectations because of things like X Factor and the fact that it's easy to get famous?
It is. I always the one thing that I do stress with anybody that comes to me and I work with is that I never give false hopes or dreams. I can never turn around and say, oh yes, you're going to be a millionaire, you're going to be the next best thing. It just doesn't work that way. It's always a case of I'll sit them down, try and get them to relax, a bit like what you've done with me today, basically, and then just have a little chat with them and see what sort of personality they are. And then I always just ask them a couple of questions. Why do you want to sing? Why do you want to play? Why do you want to perform? And it's always the answers that I look for are, if I get that I want a Ferrari, or I want to get girls, or I want to be rich and famous, it's the wrong answers. It's nothing to do with music, basically. it's all down to the fact that they just want a bit of glory.
Yeah.
So the ones that say, I just want to sing, or I love music, they tick the boxes, really. So those are the things that I tend to look for first more than anything.
So one that did come through and perhaps actually bucked that trend was Shayne Ward. We were talking.
Yes, well, what happened with Shayne was I was doing the club circuit as a solo singer, and I was playing a place in St Helens, quite a big venue there, and I was on with a band, a trio, an all-girl trio called Roofless. There was a couple of girls in the band that we kept friends with, and one of the girls left, and a young man called Shayne Ward took the place of the girl that was in the band. So it was a 2-girl, 1-boy trio. And we always kept in touch, and they used to come and watch me as a trio doing my solo stuff, and we'd go and watch them, and we'd sort of have a little jam now and again. And I'd built a home studio in the garden shed in Crewe. And they decided to come in and record an EP, and they recorded maybe 7 or 8 songs, something like that, maybe 1 or 2 more. And Shayne was doing maybe 3 or 4 songs in the set, possibly 1 or 2 others. And what he did, he came in and he was they were doing a lot of cover versions, and Boyzone were very big at the time, so he sang with this very slight Irish lilt. And he's a lot of his family's Irish anyway, so it's always in there. But we basically said, don't do this, do that, try this, try that. Discovered he'd got this great falsetto voice as well. And he basically put the work in and just had the really lucky break when he went for the X Factor, and the rest's history, as they say.
I mentioned to you as you came in, we were talking about, I think I hadn't watched the X Factor when it first started, and the very first one I ever caught was the final where he won, and he sang a version of Over the Rainbow. That made me go, oh, okay.
Incredible, yeah.
It's amazing. And he's gone on to success and still doing it now. He's even diversified. He's been in a West End.
Yes, he has. I think it was Rock of Ages. He had the lead role in Rock of Ages. He was Stacey Jacks, is the character, I think, for about 9 months. And I last saw Shayne probably about 6 weeks ago. We were in a little pub in Gorton, Manchester, on the karaoke, singing My First, My Last, My Everything by Barry White together.
With an Irish lilt?
Yes, yes, has to be there. That was just on my voice, though, this time. I copy what he does. And his voice is just really, really soared now, and I think it was just purely down to the fact that he was doing maybe 9 shows or something like that per week in the West End, and he's got this incredible voice. And he just deserves to be out there, I think. He's got he really stands out vocally, and I've worked with a lot of singers over the years, and when I've seen Shayne perform, even just on a karaoke, it just always blows me away what a great voice the guy's got.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, we'll pause for some travel, and we'll bring the story up to date, if that's okay. Chris Cragg is with me this morning. Also, before midday, we're going to... That's my goal. Shayne Ward, That's My Goal, which was his winner's single from the X Factor. But before all that, you see, he'd come into contact with my guest this morning, Chris Cragg, and it's all thanks to you, isn't it?
Oh, I wish. I wish it was that easy, yeah.
Having worked with him, how did it feel when you watched that and you saw him slowly get to the final on the night when he actually won it?
Well, I was actually sat at home with my wife Anne watching the X Factor. We'd been on tour, actually, the band in Germany a couple of weeks before, so every time he was doing the live shows, he'd phone us up afterwards, how did it do? And the girls in the band would take the call and go, oh, it was great, you did really, really well. And then we'd put the phone down and think, hope it goes through. We didn't really expect that it was going to go all the way, which he did. He just had this great look that all the mums and the girls and everybody loved. And when he actually sang the Over the Rainbow track that you talked about earlier, Stuart, I turned to my wife and said, oh, that's the one. He's won it.
And sometimes the winners aren't exactly what Mr. Cowell probably would want, because he sees pop stars and we see great singers and and after that it's what you make of it, isn't it?
Yes,
it's a springboard.
It is a springboard, yes. Ironically, I think Shayne always really wanted to possibly get into the West End. As a kid at school, he was always doing the plays and the performance and that type of stuff, and that's where he really probably wanted to go.
And you've worked with Gareth Gates as well, haven't you?
I was on the same bill as Gareth Gates,
and he did exactly the same. It's like the pop star thing. Well, that's short-lived, but he's still a very successful artist.
Yeah, and they're still out there. They still earn a living and still do very well, I suppose.
So when these people come to, because now, as you say, you decide to take the step back from performing and live a little on the narrowboat. But with your own studio, when people come in, can you spot what's going to be? Say they're going to make it, they're not going to make it. Is it something that easy to spot, or is a lot of it down to luck?
I think the making it thing is very, very difficult to predict. There's just some great singers out there, some fantastic voices, and there is that element of luck in it. The hardest thing that we find mind, being a small sort of sole trader based label, the Craggstar record label in Crewe, is trying to get the tracks out there. It's the marketing that's hard. You know, you can't compete with the likes of Sony BMG, Simon Cowell's label, when he's throwing maybe $1.5 million, $2 million behind a single to get it out there, you know, and we're probably throwing maybe £50 if we're lucky at a song to try and get it out, and trying to get radio plays very, very difficult.
Has social media helped? The fact that you can reach people so much more easily now, and you can download something?
Yes, without a doubt. I think it's the way forward for a lot of musicians nowadays. Some of the acts that we've got, some of the young girls that have been signed to the label, they've sold in places obscure as Peru and Australia and Greece. So, which
you'd never have been able to do on a £50 budget
That's
before.
Right, yes, yeah.
So when you're not producing other people and helping start other people's careers, is the guitar still really important to you?
Yes, it is, yeah. I have an old 1980 Gibson SG, which sits on the boat with me, and a little amp, and my wife goes down to the other end and lies on the bed and watches some sort of Holmes Under the Hammer or something like that, and I get the guitar out and have a little practice on it. So I'll probably try and do maybe an hour and a quarter a day, just purely for the love of it still.
I saw the video. Obviously I do my research for this morning and watched the video that's on your website. I thought, oh, okay, he can play a bit then. Still that kind of stuff, do you still like to...
Yeah, I'm actually, one of the things that I've decided to do, which is probably a bit obscure at my age, really, because I reached 50 last year, so it's not really built for 50-year-olds, the music industry now. But
Tell that to Mick Jagger. Tell that to Keith Richards.
Yeah, I decided to sort of write and record a couple of my own songs. Basically, I'm having a few vocal problems, so I'm not doing any singing until I've been to see the doctor, but it's sort of inspired me to get the guitar and write a few instrumentals as well. So I'm probably looking at maybe throwing something out in a couple of months as an instrumental and just see what happens along with the other people on the label.
Well, I can't wait to hear it. And next time we get you in, we're going to get you to bring the guitar.
Yes.
But a fascinating chat. Lovely to talk to you, Chris.
And thank you very much.
So much. Chris Cragg, thank you for coming in. It's BBC Radio Stoke. Still to come this morning. I've got some beauty tips for you. Yeah.